Hello there, my name is Hannah and this is Gamers Waypoint. So today we are going to be covering a game which I feel I personally have not seen discussed that much in comparison to some other games that are out there in the gamer sphere. Obviously there are so many that it is hard to obviously keep up with them all, nigh on impossible really, but this is a game that I experienced a long time ago, 12 years ago, and I just want to cover it. So this video, if you haven't already guessed by the thumbnail and the title, is about a game called Siren Blood Curse. Now, I'm not sure if you know it. If you don't, I am going to just do a brief overview of what the series is, etc., what the game entails, just for educational purposes. If you already know what the game is, obviously feel free to hear me ramble on, but obviously you can kind of scrub through the video if you want, if you already are an expert, which is completely understandable. And the reason that I want to discuss this game today, apart from the fact that I feel like it's not as often covered, is because it's always been there at the back of my mind. It has never really left my attention somehow, and I think it's just because it's completely ingrained in my brain. It's been printed onto that grey matter and it is stuck, right? So this is a game that I played, like I say, back when I was like 13, so quite a while ago now, and I just want to see how I feel about it these days, today, current day, modern day, whatever, right? Because to me it's such an interesting game. It embodies so many aspects from games that are very popular, that we already love, and yet there are just some things about it that I wish could maybe be brought back or maybe improved upon, etc. So anyway, this is just going to be a general discussion video. I hope that you join me for it. That would be really awesome. Mild spoiler warning, just in case. I will be using kind of characters' names and talking about parts that happen in the game. So if you kind of start watching this and think that you might want to, you know, experience the game for yourself, understandable, might want to be cautious about how much you watch, which is completely backwards. I should be encouraging you to watch, but I never want to spoil anything, which is what I'm having to deal with on Twitter at the moment with The Last of Us Part 2, but it's fine! Just have internet evasion. But anyway, without further ado, let us discuss this kind of cult classic game. So first off, it's actually pertinent to know that this is a remake. This is not the original game. Siren Blood Curse is a westernized remake of a former franchise. Can you call it a franchise when it's only 2 games? Anyway, former game called Forbidden Siren, which, as you might have guessed, spawned 2 games, the first one and Forbidden Siren 2. These were in the early noughties, kind of like 2003, and got some critical acclaim to some extent. It's actually quite interesting because the first Forbidden Siren got a bit of a following because it is similar in a lot of respects to games such as Resident Evil and Silent Hill. It is a survival horror game, which is obviously a very popular franchise, and I think it's actually really making a comeback, especially with the Resident Evil remakes that have been happening and the rumours around Silent Hill, which is still a little bit in the air, but we might actually get something concrete at some point. But obviously there were loads of other survival horror games from that kind of era that were not quite as popular and fell into the same kind of category as Forbidden Siren, I would say. But yes, so you have Forbidden Siren and Forbidden Siren 2. Forbidden Siren got a Western release, whereas Forbidden Siren 2 did not. Obviously you can get versions of the game with the English dubbing, and people have played it. You can find walkthroughs online, but for all intents and purposes the sequel ended up being just a Japanese game. The reason I kind of want to point this out as well is because it is unusual for games to get a remake so soon comparatively after its original, and Forbidden Siren became Siren Blood Curse in the remake, they were actually released within 6 years of each other. So you have Forbidden Siren in 2003 and then Siren Blood Curse in 2009, which just kind of goes to show how this game series is a little bit out of the ordinary, not considering the actual storyline itself. And I just think it's a point of interest because They were obviously trying to push for it again, but I would say that the market for this game, to this day still as well, is more of a cult following. And I suppose I'm partially involved in that cult following because I can't seem to let it go for some odd reason, and I do think it still has potential, kind of matching what you see in Silent Hill. I think the conclusion of this argument is probably going to end up being how polished / unpolished the game is in some respects, but we'll get to that in a bit. So marketing history aside, as I said, it is a game kind of akin to Silent Hill, survival horror, and the premise of the game is that it is of a cyclical nature. Everything happens again and again, and you can't seem to break the circle. In fact, the game kind of toys with the idea of possibly being able to break the circle, but if you play it, that doesn't go quite according to plan. So in Siren Blood Curse, there are a few protagonists. You have a TV crew which has come to investigate the site of a former, I think it's landslide or earthquake site that has been long since buried since like the 70s, but obviously supernatural occurrences are occurring, as it were. And you also have an American high school student called Howard, who is, I believe, supposed to be kind of like a year abroad student, but is sent a letter by one of the members of this crew, which brings him to this small Japanese town, which, like I said, is not really supposed to exist anymore. As with all survival horror games, there is obviously an enemy. In this case, they are called Shibito, which I believe is roughly Japanese for like zombie or undead or like unliving, something like that. But the difference here is that due to kind of the curse surrounding the village, the Shibito never really die. You can attack them, you can bludgeon them, you can literally kind of like disfigure them, you can hit them with crowbars, in the face, anything. After a certain amount of time they will get up again, which is obviously extremely creepy and obviously kind of enhances the game experience a little bit more, because kind of akin to Resident Evil, where you get the crimson heads if you don't set them on fire, they just kind of come back up at some point. That's kind of what the Shibitos do. After about 5 or 10 minutes, if you've kind of spent some time in a level, they'll get back up and be coming at you the same as before because they don't like you. Except in this case you can't set them on fire, so they are just a recurring enemy all the time. The curse on the village is something to do with Ouroboros. I've heard it pronounced a few different ways. Once again, RE5 kind of covers this concept, except in their own parasitic way, and it's a really odd looking place. The sky is red, the sea or the surrounding river is red, obviously looking like blood, and it does seem to have some kind of healing properties to some extent. Whenever Howard comes into contact with it, he seems to be able to kind of get back up again, having sustained some injuries but never really dying, which is interesting considering at one point he gets shot. But as I also said, it's a cyclical nature, so I don't necessarily think that it's all the water properties that are doing that. It is the fulfillment of the prophecy. So if these occurrences or events don't go as according to plan, it gets rewound so that the prophecy can be carried out, so that the main characters can be in their exact places as they should be. So that's a rough overview of the game. There are obviously so many more aspects to it, but this video is also covering kind of how I think it's aged, how I think it plays today, over a decade on. So if you want to find more about the storyline, obviously get the game. It was a PS3 release, so you should be able to grab it for cheap these days, or there are walkthroughs online so you could watch a let's play of it and experience it for yourself. But obviously next topic is what did I think? We're going to cover my personal experience with it. So I found this game back when I was 13 on the shelf of one of my local supermarkets. I didn't see any adverts for it, there was nothing hinting to buy it, no posters, anything like that. I just spotted it on the shelf and I was like, what is that? I turned it over, read it, like instantly fell in love before I even played it for some reason. And there we go, I got it for Christmas and went on my jolly way experiencing Siren Blood Curse. And my experience with it was positive. When I first played the game, I really enjoyed it. Obviously the mechanics, which we'll be getting into in a minute, were a bit fresher back then, so I was obviously not as critical of them. But one thing is for sure, I played it for the first time, and after I played it for the first time, I turned it off, Like, this isn't completing the game. I mean, I like played the first level, turned it off, turned the lights on, went upstairs and didn't touch it again for 2 months because it freaked me out that much. So if that doesn't go in the books of successful horror tactics, I don't really know what does. I was obviously 13 at the time, but it did its job so well that I felt like I couldn't touch it for like 8 weeks. So there's that. Also, I have ever since had a slight discomfort when looking at those car wash mitts, because they look like kind of the maggot Shibito, which, I mean, just, you get me? It's weird, right? I don't like them anymore. So horror tactic number 2, complete. Efficient in my book, because I seem to have been scarred for life by something you wash your car with, which I should probably get over that considering I'm nearly 25. So irrational fears aside, I did really enjoy the game at the time, and I still think it's a good game. I still enjoy the storyline. Things could kind of be freshened up a little bit, obviously for current gen, if we were to see the likes of it again. But as I was kind of talking about earlier with the Forbidden Siren and Forbidden Siren 2 releases, the likelihood of us getting another remake of this game, I feel, is not particularly high. And also, I'm not entirely sure if they would ever consider taking Forbidden Siren 2 and implementing that into a current gen remake, which I do think would be kind of cool. It kind of focuses on a different village, similar concept, but also different characters, so you could kind of take something current and make something more or less completely new, but it seems like that wouldn't be the case, especially considering how you still have the big boys such as Capcom, who really seem to be making moves and waves again with their remakes, and obviously the announcement of Resident Evil 8 Village, so I would be hard pressed to find kind of evidence that they'll be picking up Siren Blood Curse, which in my opinion is a little bit of a shame, because like I said, I do like the storyline, but it was one of those that just kind of fell to the wayside and got swept up in just the cult status instead. So in terms of being a horror game, I still think that this is quite successful. Upon revisiting it, I did think that it is still definitely creepy. Shubitos are still definitely unpleasant, and that it still has the aspects for a good horror game. Obviously it doesn't get to me quite as much as it used to, but yeah, still has all the makings. Areas that you encounter whereby you don't have any weapons, those are the ones I fear the most, because obviously you feel the most powerless, because there's not much you can do apart from have sneak tactics and stealth around all your enemies. If you happen to alert one of the Shibito, there is kind of not much you could do to escape them. You can obviously run off and try and hide again, and if you evade their line of sight you can get away from them that way, but if you don't really know where you're going, which there are a lot of dark scenes as well in terms of lighting, so sometimes it's a little bit harder to navigate your way around the setting. It's very easy to just kind of turn a corner and one be right there and you're like, oh, okay, that didn't go well. So basically there is a character called Bella. She is a little kid. I'm guessing she's about maybe like 10 years old, something like that. And when you play as her, you never have a weapon. So it's all about the stealth. And whenever I found out that I was playing as Bella, I was just like, I don't want to play as Bella. Because it just feels like there is not that much you can do, and you have to be quite tactful with how you move around. And they are not bothered that you're a kid at all. They will come at you just the same, except you can't be handling a sickle as a kid, which if it was up to me would give all kids sickles. We wouldn't at all. But basically, obviously, it intensifies that horror aspect when you realise that you're defenceless and that you can just only hide in the dark. Areas where you have weapons, of course, you can pick up kind of like, as I say, sickles or like axes or pipes, etc. to hit the Shibito with. They're primarily melee weapons a lot of the time. You do get some guns sometimes, but they are not as prominent as just things that you can pick up for like gardening, etc. The horror's still there, because obviously they still come at you, but once you are wielding something, it does feel a lot more manageable. It feels more like you are in control of the situation. But as I say, the thing to remind yourself of is that after a certain amount of time they do get back up again, so you kind of have to be wary if you're if you're a bit stuck on a map or something to that extent, travelling back through and retracing your steps will probably find you facing the same foe again, because they are resilient. I mean, they do not give up. Speaking of areas and kind of map locations, the map for Siren Blood Curse is not big at all, and it is obviously an on-rails game, so you kind of have pre-rendered sections, obviously, that you play through. They are good little sections all in all, but one thing I would say, which they've probably done it on purpose so that kind of you feel like you're never too far away from an enemy, once again upping the suspense, but it can feel a bit crammed together sometimes. If by some Hail Mary miracle we got another shot at Siren Blood Curse, or maybe a Siren Blood Curse sequel, it'd be nice to maybe have a bit more of an open feeling in some respects. So there is a part where you're in a field that feels quite open. I mean, you have to kind of climb up and down the levels a little bit, but you do feel kind of a sense of airiness, if you will, in that section. But other than that, then you are in kind of like small village parts or by a church, or a lot of it seems to take place at the hospital. That is kind of the area I was mentioning where it's a bit dark and you can kind of get a bit discombobulated, disorientated, and end up running into Shibito unwittingly. Not that you would ever wittingly want to run into a Shibito, but yeah, they are quite small places, which obviously we're talking about a game that was released in 2009, so I wasn't expecting it to have this great whacking open world aspect to it, and I don't really think that that would fit well for the storyline anyway, but it would be nice if it did ever get revisited to just kind of expand upon these areas a little bit more. Another thing is that obviously because of the cyclical nature of the game, it does make sense that you will be revisiting places again, because you kind of have to go through events again, but not in a boring way, just in case you're wondering. There is always a different point to be made in the storyline when you do go visit these places again, but I think in some respects it'd be nice if there was like an extra place to go, so that you're not just going through everything over and over again. But I don't really have a complaint about it, because like I say, this game is over a decade old now and was for the PS3, not that the PS3 wasn't more than capable of rendering things like this, as we saw with Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, but it would be nice to just have a little bit more to bite off if they ever did decide to mess around with Siren Blood Curse again. To say that the game is that old as well, I wouldn't say that the graphics look particularly bad. They're obviously not mind-blowing, and if I'm being honest, I don't think they ever were mind-blowing, but they definitely don't look bad. You wouldn't look at it and think, wow, this is like a really old game. You can just tell that it's from, well, what will be nearly 2 generations back now once we get the PS5. So I would say that it still looks pretty good for its age, and it's obviously playable. In terms of manoeuvring and movement though, game controls, they can look a little bit stiff by today's standards. Instead of being kind of fluid and smooth, sometimes you can get a bit of this with the characters, you know, which doesn't look the greatest. It's kind of like if you go back and play GTA San Andreas, still a fantastic game, but things just feel a bit blockier somehow. The game in its own way is also kind of episodic. It wasn't released in multiple installments or anything like that, it was all on one disc, so it's all there first time you open the box, nothing like Life is Strange where you were waiting every couple of months to get a new episode, and I feel like they've probably done this because it is centred around a TV crew to some extent. Obviously it's supposed to be a documentary about this spooky place that isn't supposed to exist anymore, and they get pretty much trapped in kind of like a time warp wormhole type situation. But the only thing about this being episodic is that I feel like sometimes it does kind of detract. It can feel like the review or the what happened last time segment comes up kind of often, and some of the kind of episodes are kind of short, so something that you literally only played 20 minutes prior is being shown to you again as to what you previously did, and it breaks it up sometimes and makes it feel a less involved experience, if that makes sense. It can detract and take out the immersion, because obviously you get used to playing a level and then you're being shown exactly what you just did. somewhat unnecessary in some respects. I think this is also because I believe in the Forbidden Siren series you seem to be able to kind of pick timelines, so there have always been multiple character selections and multiple characters that are the adhesive for the story, but from what I could tell from watching videos, it looks like you can kind of go through and pick things at certain points of time, and I think there's like a good way to play it, if you know what I mean, so that everything flows nicely and you can kind of go back and choose to play certain bits so that you kind of moulding the story. The story seems to be the same no matter what, but you can go about it different ways. I think that they kind of tried to maintain that to some extent whilst also adopting this TV crew centrality. I know that there are arguments for games such as Until Dawn because they do that as well, but I think, I don't know, they just seem to handle it a little bit more. They don't show you exactly what you just did, and obviously the parts where you're in the psychiatrist's office, they break up that as well so that it doesn't feel all smushed together, whereas Siren Blood Curse can feel just a bit smushed together sometimes. It's not the worst thing in the world by any means, it's just something that I did notice, and I think, once again, if there was ever a possibility of it being revisited, it'd be good to either not have that episodic nature at all, or to just space out the episodes a little bit more so that you don't feel like you're literally watching something that you did 5 seconds ago. So let's talk about the Shubitos themselves. They are very interesting foes, very interesting creatures that are obviously people that have been enveloped by this curse, and they kind of like bleed from their eyes and stuff like that. It's all very creepy, and like I said, they are good game enemies. They're disturbing to look at. You don't really want to understand what's going on because it's just something that you wouldn't want to happen to yourself kind of thing, which is very cool. But the first thing I would say is that there are some Shibito which are kind of variants or mutations, and one of them is the maggot Shibito. It's a very tall thing and it likes to kind of smash through the environment around you. The one thing that is a bit weird, I mean it's supposed to be weird, is the fact that it kind of like makes baby sounds. So basically, if you've not played it, all Shibito have this kind of voice effect on them. They can still talk, but they're a little bit repetitious, and they basically have like, if you put like a phaser on your voice a little bit to make it sound weird. So I'm guessing that through the transition of this curse that something happens to the vocal cords, and it's like a multi-dimensional sounding voice, like not like godly or anything like that, but kind of creepy. And I'm guessing that's something that we're going for with the maggot Shibito, except getting rid of vocabulary altogether. But yeah, I won't mimic it or anything, but it sounds a bit like a baby, which is supposed to be unsettling, and it does work in that respect, but it's just a bit weird. And then I found, like, when I was going through it again, that once again it kind of takes away from the situation, because a situation where you should be scared and uncomfortable, as horror games want to make you feel, I ended up just being more like confused and being like, that's weird. Why did they make that sound like that? That's just really strange. Obviously in the Silent Hills playable teaser, there was like that baby in the sink and stuff like that. So it does seem to be a recurring theme that game developers for horror games come across again and again, except this time they implemented it in something that is just really tall and weird looking and just off-putting. The rest of the Shibito though are thoroughly creepy. I mean, you have flying ones that also have wings coming out of their eyes. I just want to pull those out really badly. Don't know if you know what trypophobia is, but that's kind of how I feel about trypophobia. You just want to pull it out and make it regular or whatever. But yeah, so you've got flying ones that are a little bit more of a hassle to get, because if you've not got a gun on you, obviously they're above your head and whatnot. Then you've also got the ones that look like the car wash mitts that I mentioned earlier. They look weird. They're kind of like more advanced mutations, most likely, a bit like with The Last of Us, how obviously you go from regular infected to full-on clicker. So I do think it works really well in that respect. And like I said, even with the maggot Shibito, it's not something that you want to encounter. It is weird. It's just that these other types of Shibito, I would say, that add more horror staples in their own right. Obviously there aren't other games where you encounter Shibito, but if you're talking about traditional conventional horror tropes, I would say that the other categories of Shibito are something that you would expect to find. So one thing I want to draw attention to as well, which is a bit of a spoiler, is the kind of ending, the boss battle. I remember this boss battle as being like really psychedelic, and it definitely is, do not get me wrong. But upon experiencing it again, I suppose that there were things that I'd just forgotten. So one thing that I would point out is that another part of this game is the fact that there is a sacrifice called Miyako. She's a girl, a Japanese woman, and she is obviously going to be given to the sacrifice of Ouroboros, and Howard tries to save her, spoiler obviously, but as the story goes, you don't quite manage to do that, and she does get sacrificed in this weird kind of blood pool thing. And what emerges after she's sacrificed looks just a bit like a big translucent leech, and I think that could maybe be improved upon a little bit. It didn't look particularly scary in my eyes. It didn't look like it was the best designed thing either. It looked a bit like a hasty decision, and they're like, oh, after this sacrifice something needs to happen, there we go. And it's a bit, what happened? So yeah, I think they could incorporate that segment a little bit more and expand upon it a little bit as well. Maybe design something completely different, and then maybe like a mini boss segment where obviously Miyako is actually someone that you have to defend yourself against, or just a little bit of a rewriting, because like the sacrifice, that made sense, but then what came out of the pool was just a little bit random, which I know I keep saying that about a few things, and like I said as well, I can't be overly critical of this game because I still do really like it, but yeah, I think that it'd be good if that got zhuzhed up a little bit in some hypothetical world. And then the actual boss battle itself, so you do get this kind of theme of colonies with the maggots, etc., and obviously kind of hive mind aspect about it all, which is really cool, but the end boss just once again seems maybe a little bit out of place. It kind of sticks within that insect realm, but it's a big wasp essentially, which is not unweird, but once again I think that they could have maybe designed something that was more akin to the other enemies that you've been fighting, because there seems to be a consistent appearance whereby obviously they are zombie-like creatures, like I say, with blood from the eyes, or kind of mutations of zombie creatures, and then when you get to the end of the game you just fight a massive wasp, which obviously, like I say, it's obviously to do with the curse. It kind of does hint at something kind of parasitic. But yeah, I was expecting to go against something that maybe looks like a massive Shibito brain, or something that looks more akin to, like I say, the lower level foes that you've been facing, because obviously mutations and evolution happens within the realm of zombification, if you will, as a loose term, but they don't usually end up looking like wasps. Obviously with games such as Dead Rising you do get that concept whereby you can smash wasps so that it kind of disperses a few zombies at a time because they have the parasite in their brain. But apart from the maggots and everything, there's no discussion about where Shibitos come from in terms of an anatomic level, just that there has been a curse. So one thing that I would change is the boss battle. Don't get me wrong, it's psychedelic as all hell and looks actually really cool, and you have the soundtrack playing over the top whilst you're defeating it, but yeah, maybe just some tweaks to how that looks. I'm not against it just being a wasp, but it was just kind of like a kaleidoscope looking thing. Maybe have some more attributes applied to it, facially or whatever, that more closely resemble what you have been facing before, so it just seems a bit more cohesive. But one thing I do want to say as well, which I kind of said in my last video when I was critiquing things, is I am not a game designer, so I definitely appreciate all of the effort and thought process that goes into these things, because I've never been in a position to make anything like that. And like I said, when I first played it as a young teenager, really enjoyed it and didn't have any of these thoughts about it, just thought it was a great game all the way through from start to finish. But as I've kind of grown older, there are just a few things that I think could be swapped which would make it that bit better. So the last thing I want to touch on in this video is actually nothing to do with gameplay or anything like that. I'm a bit of a music geek, and so one thing that I always pay attention to in a video game without doubt and without fail is the soundtrack, which I know there are many of you out there as well that do the same. The soundtrack for Siren Blood Curse, in my opinion, still holds up today. I think it is very cool. Not everybody has to be into throat singing to enjoy it. I personally am not the biggest fan of throat singing or anything like that, but within the confines of the game and the message that it's trying to convey about how weird a place this is and how cult-like it is, it's really useful, and it just kind of emits this foreboding sense all the way through, but is, in my opinion, a really well written piece of music, or you know, just atmospheric tune, if you will. There are lots of different types of music in this game as well, not genre wise, but more like how they convey each scene. So for instance, when you play as Bella and you're going through the fields, you do see kind of like little fireflies and spritey looking things, which is actually really pretty for that part of the game, and the music that plays on top of it kind of matches that as well. It feels kind of light and kind of as if the song is dancing around with the sprites and the fireflies, but at the same time you do kind of get these minor progressions in it which still alert you to the fact that you are not in somewhere that is nice, you're in a place that is actually quite scary and uncomfortable, and I just think that it was well written in that respect, because you get the contrast, but you were reminded that at some points you do feel safe in the game, but this is not the case. You are definitely not out of the woods, and there's absolutely nothing secure about this place whatsoever, including the fact that from time to time they do also have earthquakes. So if you are not just going up against the Shibito and having to deal with all that, you actually have natural world occurrences as well that seem to be getting in the way and make things that bit worse. My two pieces of music from the game are probably the one that plays, which I can't quite remember the name of, when you play as is it Sergo Sega? I can't ever remember how to pronounce his name, and I don't want to butcher it, but probably already have, because that piece kind of feels adventurous in a weird way. It's a bit bouncier, and I suppose that it kind of imbues the fact that you're maybe feeling a bit more confident because he actually has a gun, not just a melee weapon, so you probably do feel a bit more in control, and so the music isn't like this grand orchestral gesture or anything like that. It's still akin to all the other tracks in the game, but there is just something about it that kind of makes you feel like, yeah, you've got a handle on this a little bit more than you do with the other characters, because this is also a character that knows exactly what's going on, knows exactly why the roles are being played as they are, and he's just kind of, well, for some part he's going along with it, then for another part he's not, but I think the track really conveys that understanding that he has of this village and of this small world that you're experiencing, because obviously for all the other characters it's confusing and concerning and they don't quite know how they've got into this situation or this place, and they're just looking for a way out, whereas he knows that there kind of is no way out, so he's just more like owning it, which I think is really cool. And like I said, there's a massive sense of that in the theme that plays when you're playing as him, and then there's another song which is called Lament, and obviously as you can imagine there is lament involved, but I think the reason I like this song as well is because it actually portrays the fact that there is a certain sadness to the game. Like, you're obviously in this crazy world and you don't know what's going on, and you're just finding out everything as you go along, just as the characters are, which is how a good game works. But at the same time, when you start unravelling things about the past of some of the residents, or about how this village was before the earthquake, etc., or when you start realising that there's an actual kind of futility to everything that's happening, I think it's just really well touched upon in this track, because like I say, it's a sad state of affairs. Like, you can tell that some of the Shibito know that they're stuck in the cycle and that there's nothing that can change, and then obviously the people who are newcomers or the tourists are just trying to get out, and it's all really kind of helpless and hopeless. And so the track of Lament, there's a part of the game where one of the Shibito comes up to Sega, can't pronounce it, and obviously expresses that there is maybe like some past between them, and he just turns around and shoots her, but not in like a malicious way. It's because he's obviously so tired of this happening and he has no way to escape. She has no way to escape. I mean, she's got no control because she's a Shibito, but he can't even come across a way to stop this all from happening. And spoiler alert, it doesn't stop happening, it just keeps going on. And this song, just like I say, emphasises the fact that it's a very sad situation, which I suppose sometimes you don't think about in terms of horror games because you're thinking about the horror itself, but if you do think about games such as Silent Hill, there are always these thematic elements which delve into somebody's past or explain something about how they're behaving, and it does make you think a little bit more. I'm not saying that Siren Blood Curse has any massive kind of realisation or epiphany about it, but at the same time you do get to learn just enough that makes you wonder how this place became the way it did. But obviously you do get insights as to what certain characters do, which continues the cycle and why the curse came about in the first place. But yeah, I think the soundtrack is absolutely great. I'm not saying that it's like life-changing and absolutely phenomenal, but I think for the game it works really well, and whenever I come across it I enjoy listening to it. Like I said, it's a little bit out there, but then again it's a horror game, so soundtracks for those usually do incorporate a few different kind of sound design aspects so that it's kind of creepy but reassuring at the same time somehow. Bit weird, I know, but they seem to do it very well, and I will just keep playing the games because they obviously know exactly what they're doing. So there you have it, those are just some of my viewpoints on Siren Blood Curse. If you've not come across the game before or heard of it at all, I do hope that this has been informative and kind of enlightening to some extent, and maybe it's encouraged you to check it out yourself. But yeah, it's definitely something that I for some reason have in high regard. There is sort of a nostalgic element regarding the game for me, which is probably why I just kind of come back to it every so often, whether that be watching videos about it, playing it, or listening to the soundtrack. But it is a really cool game in its own way. It's definitely not perfect, but then again, there isn't really such a thing as an absolutely perfect game. So I definitely don't knock it down any pegs for how it's executed. It's just the fact that it's a few years old now, so in some cases it just doesn't look as polished anymore, and arguably might not have been actually that polished back when it was released, but it was a bit harder to notice, maybe because obviously we were used to graphics and the engines looking that way anyway. Plus, how can you go wrong with a game whereby at the end you're walking around with a tesseract-like cube and you were literally just smiting all the Shibito, and there's a kick-ass rock track playing. Obviously it's just designed for the game, and I've found that Japanese games like to do that quite a bit. You find that in Dead Rising as well, but as cheesy as it might seem in some respects, I think it's really cool as well, and it's just kind of a badass ending to the game. But there you go. I suppose the end note of this is going to be that I really enjoyed it back then, I still enjoy it now, it's just quirky. So that's it for this video, guys. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you did find it interesting. Feel free to leave comments and likes, etc. Feedback is appreciated, just don't be an internet troll. And I hope that you consider continuing this journey with us, because that would be super awesome. So if you want to subscribe and share, that would be great as well. There are some links below in the description for the website, Twitter, etc. We're still kind of in the process of getting those things set up, but they're definitely more set up than they were the last time. And yeah, so check those out if you have a moment. So until next time, hope that you have a great day, hope you enjoyed the video, and don't ever stop exploring. See you later, guys.